Hey guys, it's Sasha. Last week, Tesla released their Q1 results, and after taking a look through them, I have gone and updated my model for Tesla and my target price. Tesla's Q1 results were spectacular, and the numbers in there were very strong, with profits far exceeding most people's expectations, mine included. However, when I read through the presentation, the 10K that Tesla later filed with the SEC, and having listened to the investor call, I covered it live on my channel as it happened, I saw a number of issues in there that have made me make a few adjustments to the assumptions in the model. And as a result of those adjustments, my target price has dropped from $3,300 to just $3,200. A relatively small drop, but a drop nonetheless. I'm going to explain exactly what made me reduce my target price and show you what the changes in the assumptions in the model have been and why I made them. And I'll also show you a few interesting things about my valuation, what Tesla's business worth, for example, is worth on car sales alone without anything else. Now, before I dive into the details, I want to highlight that I build my valuations based on probable outcome likelihoods, and I only value business lines that have a reasonable level of probability. And this is a really important thing to talk about. This means that my model does not have AI robots in them or a multi-million fleet of robotaxis. And a lot of Tesla fans will point fingers saying that I am a bear and I just don't get it. But here is the simple fact of which I am working. Tesla's full self-driving has moved along massively just in the last year. Absolutely huge level of progress, and the development from just processing static images to analyzing video to build full vector space models of surrounding objects is astounding. There are now 100,000 cars out there using FSD beta. However, if you watch the videos and study them carefully, there are still a lot of small edge cases, a lot of polishing to do, a lot of cases where the car just doesn't know what to do, doesn't do the right thing, doesn't do what you would expect it to do. Elon Musk announced at the Cyber Radio event when Giga Texas opened that Tesla is working now on a robotaxi that will have no steering wheel and no pedals, and everyone got massively excited.
There's going to be a dedicated robotaxi. It's going to look quite futuristic.
Now, I completely admire the intent and the direction here. In fact, I think this is going to be one of the biggest innovations in our lifetimes. But as an investor, I have to determine what the probability and timeline of each of the company's business lines is. And from where I'm sitting, to get FSD to a place where a steering wheel and pedals are fundamentally not required in a car, and where the robotaxi is not geofenced in any way following a prescribed route, I think we are still some way away from that point. Now, getting the neural net to a point where all the edge cases and fine-tuning are good enough for that, I think is probably 2 to 3 years away at best. That is my estimation. And then once the software is close, the design of the robotaxi then from that point, once they know exactly what the setup has to be before they finalize the design, is also going to take time. This will be a fundamentally new class of car that doesn't have to adhere to existing car standards. It doesn't have to be designed in the same way that a car today has to be designed in. Now look at the timeline for how long it took to develop the Cybertruck, the core design, and then the path to building a production line for it. The first Cybertruck prototype was unveiled back in 2019, and we're now looking at production maybe in 2023, possibly in 2024. So realistically, I would place at least a 2 to 3 year lead time on the robotaxi getting out of the door from when we actually get it unveiled for the first time. And even at that point, when the final product is ready, there's going to be a huge number of regulatory hurdles to overcome. Nothing like just releasing a regular car out there. I don't know exactly what and how, but I imagine that the process to let fully automated cars that don't even have pedals or steering out onto the public roads is going to have to battle some bureaucracy. So I'd place another 2 to 3 year timeline on that at best again. Unfortunately, this one will be to a large degree out of Tesla's hands on how long it's going to take. So here I am looking at a timeline that I think is probably going to be more like 8 to 9 years before robotaxis may have a meaningful impact on Tesla's commercials, before we know that it is definitely going to happen. And maybe in the meantime, there will be some prototypes or some specific cities or counties that will allow a limited number for testing or whatever. But that doesn't really affect my valuation, and if there are hiccups along the way, it might take even longer. And over that amount of time, many other unforeseen things can happen that will affect that timeline. There may be a very credible competitor that turns up out of nowhere, just like Tesla turned up out of nowhere itself in the first place. Elon Musk may, for whatever reason, not be there driving Tesla's development in 10 years' time. Maybe his priorities shift. Maybe something else happens. My point is that placing a huge weight of my valuation on this theoretical future potential of robotaxis and attributing a very large proportion of my total business value to that business in just say 4 or 5 years' time doesn't seem to make sense. And I saw that ARK and many other people do exactly this, and unfortunately I just don't see the same light, and I don't have robotaxis in my model for that reason. And given the timeline I just described for just robotaxis, I think I'd take Elon's estimate of Optimus being in actual commercial production next year with a pinch of salt as well. Remember, the Semi and Roadster were also apparently going to be produced next year, back in 2018. And the AI that Tesla is developing for cars is great. But there are orders of magnitude more complexity for developing the same neural net for a robot. A car operates in a relatively simple, pretty much two-dimensional space in terms of its decision making. It can decide to go forwards, it can decide to go backwards, it can turn left and right, and that's about it. It operates on a prescribed set of paths that have a limited number of nodes and features. These paths are roads. A robot has to function in a much more complex, completely unpredictable 3D space that has a considerably more complex set of features. A robot also has a significantly more complex set of movement decisions that it has to make in order to interact with its surroundings and to navigate through it, decisions on how to move legs and arms and other body parts using multiple different joints. And a robot also has to be able to interact and liaise with and maybe, not affect other users like people in a much more complex way than just clicking something on a screen or pressing the brake pedal. So for me, the timeline on Optimus having a meaningful impact on my Tesla valuation is also significantly longer than what everyone seems to expect. So I don't have it in my model for now either. But here's the model that I just updated, and the first set of changes from the last version of it is on the timelines for car production. I've made some minor adjustments to this year's numbers and a few other things, but in terms of some of the bigger pieces, I have kept the compact car in this model, although Tesla is apparently not currently working on one and doesn't have any immediate plans to. And this is because as Tesla scales to produce millions of cars per year, they will naturally have to produce cars that are tailored to different consumer needs and wants. There are fundamental reasons why a smaller form factor for a car is more appropriate for people who live in large, busy cities, and particularly in some European or Asian countries. Maybe some people who prefer a smaller car, people who don't need to lug around a 400-mile battery for their daily 10 miles of driving. So I think some type of compact car will have to arrive at some point, whether robotaxis come or not. Because as cool as robotaxis are, theoretically, for anyone who doesn't live in a city, for anyone who has specific use cases where people will still need a car with controls over a robotaxi, we're still a long way away from regular cars not being on the roads. So I've kept the compact car in the model here, but I've pushed out the timeline, and I have them arriving in 2025 at the earliest. Based on my projections, Tesla should be hitting over 4 million cars a year in 2025, and that I think is going to be big enough where they're really going to have the compact come in. I've also pushed back my Cybertruck and Semi forecast. I have the Cybertruck now launching somewhere in the middle of 2024. I know Elon said next year, and I know that everyone's just gotten penciled that into their models, but the timelines just keep moving every quarter, and with the ongoing issues in Shanghai that don't seem to be easing as fast as people expected, and the ramps in Berlin and Austin under pressure because 4680 cells are not ramping fast enough, I have a feeling we might have to wait a bit longer. I am guessing Tesla will want to wait until the 4680 production is at full speed so they don't have to go and design a redundant version of the Cybertruck working on 2170 cells before that ramp is there. And we're not hearing very much at all about the Semi, so again, I have pushed that right to the back of 2024 with only 500 Semis made that year. I then have the same additional 3 factories that I've had before in this plan that I expect Tesla to maybe start announcing or announce all 3 at some point in the second half of this year, with one of them maybe opening within 2 years, which is roughly the timeline that we've had for Shanghai and slightly shorter than the timeline that we've had for Berlin. the other two will be coming in 2025 and 2026. I've also added this bit on the right here where I calculate the number of cars manufactured so far this year so that I can exclude them from my calculations of future cash flows by subtracting them from the yearly total forecast. And in this model, I expect Shanghai, Berlin, and Austin to gradually become some of the biggest car factories in the world. You can already tell by the sheer size of those things that that is the objective. And as they build additional factory phases, because there is space for many more buildings on those sites, I think Gigatexas particularly will become the biggest car factory in the world by production. It's certainly looking that way. My total production across the 4 existing factories and the 3 new factories in this model takes Tesla to 10.5 million cars a year in 2031. That would make Tesla the biggest car manufacturer in the world, according to today's numbers, and some would say that that is unlikely. But they are currently on course for making around 1.5 to 1.6 million cars just this year, and the 2 new factories have barely got going. And we are seeing demand continue to far outpace supply, even though Tesla is now making over 300,000 cars a quarter. The time of available supply is still dropping in every single quarterly report, and the wait times for new cars on the website are the longest they have ever been. So I don't think this is an unreasonable assumption for a company that is making more electric cars than the rest of the entire global production put together, with 30% gross margins and net profit margins that are way, way, way ahead of any of the incumbent manufacturers. And then I have also got some assumptions on car-related parts of Tesla's business that are not cars themselves. I'm expecting insurance sold through Tesla to become a very popular product where it is far easier and in many cases cheaper to buy through Tesla than sourcing your own. And my assumption is that half of Teslas in 10 years' time will be using Tesla's insurance, a bit like how most people using Apple handsets will be spending a lot of money with Apple's apps and everything else. If you think that that is a tad optimistic, you might be right, but insurance is a tiny, tiny part of the valuation contribution. It contributes only about 1.5% of Tesla's gross profit in 2031 in this model, so it's kind of irrelevant anyway. I then have some assumptions about supercharger revenue. I presume that these will also start opening up to non-Tesla cars following recent tests in the future, but again, supercharging is not a very big component of my valuation. And then here I have FSD as a service. Now we know that we're about 2.1 to 2.2 million Tesla cars on the road in total as of the end of 2021. And at the Gigatexas opening, Elon Musk said that there are currently 100,000 cars using FSD beta. So that lines up pretty well with my assumption that on average this year, 4% of all existing Tesla cars have FSD beta on them. And as FSD beta improves over the next decade, I have that going up to 50%. Now, this one might be conservative if you believe that FSD will fundamentally replace the need for driving altogether, but then again, it might not for a while, and it might be optimistic according to some other people. I even have Tesla starting to offer FSD as a service to some other car manufacturers out there, because I believe there'll be a number of them that won't have their own version, and I think it'll be far easier and make far more sense for them to go and license Tesla software, and I see that starting somewhere in 2024 or 2025. And then I have this energy section. The solar parts of the assumptions here are pretty much irrelevant, so I'm not going to talk about them because solar doesn't really have any meaningful impact on the valuation at all. But then I have the storage deployment that cumulatively goes up to over 300 gigawatt hours by 2031. Now, over the last 2 years, Tesla's energy storage has really been pretty much put on ice as batteries are being prioritized into cars while we have supply chain constraints. But Elon alluded multiple times to his point of view being that energy will probably be a bigger component of Tesla's future business model than cars. And I share that thinking, especially when you go and look at the total addressable markets for both of those opportunities and those two businesses. But every quarter at the moment, the energy business continues to stall. In fact, in the last quarter, it fell considerably, and timelines continue to just be pushed further and further out. And we're not hearing any real updates on this whatsoever. Nobody's even asking questions. And for me, it sounds like the 4680 cells are going to take a while to ramp, and they will be the underpinning for the future of that business. Now, the Q1 presentation said the Gigatexas is actually going to start producing cars with 2170 cells later this year, presumably because 4680 cells are not being produced reduced fast enough. And my assumption here is that Tesla's commercial model with energy storage works primarily as an energy supplier. And these numbers, remember, are cumulative. So for example, in 2026, Tesla only add about 12 gigawatt hours of storage from 20 going to 32. And they added 4 last year. So I don't think the assumptions here are completely out of whack. Now, based on all of these factors, this is the assumption that I have reduced considerably. So the energy part of Tesla's business here has reduced for me, and that has contributed to the valuation dropping as well. Then I have this calculator sheet that multiplies and adds all these assumptions together and adds a whole bunch of financial overlays. And some people might say that the numbers in here are ridiculous and completely impossible, because I have Tesla making $1 trillion of revenue in 2031, and that is way more than any company has ever made. But if you go and look at some of the other biggest companies in the world, Apple made $124 billion in just the last quarter alone. So $1 billion revenue in a year for Tesla in 10 years is only roughly 2 times the current run rate for Apple today. And Tesla's last quarter had almost $19 billion of revenue, so about $76 billion if you just go multiply by 4 to get an annualized figure. So at the end of the day, it is baking in quite a substantial amount of growth, but I don't think that that revenue is necessarily implausible, and it is just a product of the assumptions that I just shared with you. So if you feel that that particular total is unreasonable, it must follow that some of the assumptions are completely unreasonable and have to be considerably lower as well. The majority of it actually comes from car sales. So all the other things that you may disagree with more are not even that much of a factor in terms of getting to that total number. And remember, Tesla in this model only gets to 10 million roughly car sales in 2031. And to me, that sounds like somewhat reasonable as an assumption. By the way, my Patreon team members get access to all of my models, including this one. So if you want to see all of the details, maybe play around with the data and have a look in a bit more detail, you are free to join and get full access if you want to. So when I do all the calculations, I get a target share price of $3,100 using the perpetual growth model and $3,200 using an EBITDA multiple. And I'm happy to stick with the 3,200 for this one for now. But here is an interesting trick. Let's say that you're okay with my assumptions on Tesla making cars and you think that they are maybe somewhere roughly reasonable, but you are not okay with any of the other things in this model. Well, we can just go and delete insurance, supercharging, FSD, and energy completely above here. Delete the revenues, delete the profits, and delete the costs as well. And then let's be generous and not even adjust the R&D or admin costs down as a result of that. And when we do that, my target price for Tesla on pure car sales alone is still $1,900 after I delete every other revenue stream. And that's of Tesla just getting roughly to Toyota's current production levels in 10 years' time. And I'm pretty happy with that, and this is why Tesla for me is the biggest position in my portfolio. If you found this video useful, please don't forget to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you guys later.